Okay, so there was this bit of news recently, maybe flew under the radar for some folks, a military strike, and the place mentioned, Bahawalpur.
Right, Bahawalpur. And, it might sound obscure, but this city in Pakistan, it's actually been a really significant spot for global security issues for a very long time.
Yeah, a long time. It's not just a place on a map. When you hear Bahawalpur, you should probably think, well, extremist activity,
Yeah.
kind of persistent hub.
Exactly. A nerve center, really. It's had this unseen but pretty major role in things for years.
Which brings us to why we're diving deep today. India's Operation Sindoor happened May 7th, 2025. And this wasn't, just some border skirmish.
No, definitely not. This was targeted, deliberate, aimed right at known terrorist hideouts in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And Bahawalpur, it was absolutely central to that operation.
And the thread connecting all of this, giving it such historical weight, is the murder of Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street Journal reporter, back in 2002.
Absolutely horrific. And Bahawalpur wasn't just incidental to that story, it was a key location, a really disturbing piece of that puzzle.
So that's our goal here. We're going to unpack Operation Sindoor, dig into the history that led up to it, and really try to understand the bigger picture, especially, with Daniel Pearl in mind. We've looked at various reports to sort of connect these dots.
Okay, so Bahawalpur. As you said, it sounds almost quaint, but the reality, very different. It's in Pakistan's Punjab province, and it's essentially been, well, the main base for Jaish-e-Mohammed, GEM.
And let's be clear, this isn't some minor group. The UN calls them a terrorist organization,
Yeah.
led by Maulana Masood Azhar.
Right. And they have a long, very bloody track record in South Asia. So many attacks, so much loss of life. And that direct link to Daniel Pearl's abduction and murder in 2002, it's crucial. We can't ignore that.
It's just deeply unsettling thinking back to late 2001, December. Daniel Pearl actually traveled to Bahawalpur.
He did. He was a real truth seeker, wasn't he? Pakistan was claiming publicly they were cracking down on militants after a big attack in India. But Pearl,
He wanted to see for himself, verify if the crackdown was actually happening, boots on the ground journalism.
and what's really shocking, honestly, is that he went right into GEM's offices there in Bahawalpur.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the guts that took and the risk.
Absolutely. And what he saw totally contradicted the official line. Posters promoting jihad everywhere, apparently. Open fundraising for holy war.
It wasn't hidden. It was right there. And that must have shaped his reporting, obviously.
Obviously. His piece came out January 2nd, 2002, just weeks before he was kidnapped. And the headline says it all, really. Militant groups in Pakistan thrive despite crackdown.
Stark. And tragically prophetic, wasn't it?
It really was. And it still resonates today, arguably.
Then, January 2002, Karachi. Pearl gets lured there, thinking he's got an interview. Instead, he's abducted. And a key figure involved is Omar Saeed Sheikh.
Yes, Sheikh, British Pakistani radical. And his name rings a bell because he was one of the militants freed in that Indian Airlines hijacking, the IC-814 incident.
Back in '99, that's a really critical piece of context. India was forced to release militants, including Masood Azhar himself, to get the hostages back.
Exactly, and look what happened. Azhar goes on to found Jamitha and Sheikh.
Sheikh hands Pearl over to Abdul Rauf Azhar, GEM's operational chief, also Masood Azhar's younger brother, and he's the one identified as orchestrating Pearl's murder.
The details are just brutal. The beheading, the video they made, that image of Pearl in chains became this horrible symbol of the dangers journalists face doing this kind of work.
Just horrific. Okay, fast forward to April 2025, the attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, 26 people killed, mostly tourists.
And investigators traced it back to GEM. That seems to have been the tipping point for India, the trigger for Operation Sindoor.
Right. And like you said, this was planned. May 7th, 1:05 a.m., India used Rafale jets, Scout missiles, Hammer missiles, drones, loitering munitions too, a significant force package.
Targeting 9 specific terror camps. And crucially, one of those was GEM's Markaz Subhanallah complex, right there in Bahawalpur.
That wasn't accidental.
Yeah.
That was hitting them right at their core, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The symbolism of hitting Bahawalpur is huge. It wasn't just a training camp. It was known as Masood Azhar's base, where his family lived, reportedly with some level of state protection even.
So the strike challenged that sense of impunity they might have felt.
Definitely. And the reported casualties from that specific strike in Bahawalpur were significant. Abdul Rauf Azhar, the one linked to Pearl's murder, reportedly killed, along with 10 members of Masood Azhar's family, his sister, brother-in-law.
And Azhar himself confirmed the deaths, called them guests of Allah, apparently.
Yeah, a very detached way of putting it, considering the loss within his own family and leadership. Chilling, really.
Across all 9 targets, the total number of terrorists reported neutralized was near 100. Bahawalpur and another base, Lashkar-e-Taiba's in Muridke, supposedly hit hardest.
India's defense ministry was quick to state their focus was purely on terrorists, that it wasn't meant to escalate things further.
But Pakistan's reaction was immediate. Condemnation and claims of, 26 civilian deaths, including a child?
That was their claim. But India's Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, fired back pretty sharply. He questioned why national flags were being used on the coffins if they were just ordinary civilians.
Yeah, that does cast some doubt, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Raises questions about Pakistan's narrative there.
It certainly does. It makes you wonder.
Let's circle back to Daniel Pearl for a moment.
Yeah.
Because he was so much more than just a headline, you know? He was the Wall Street Journal's South Asia bureau chief, deeply committed to finding the facts.
Based in Mumbai, right. And after 9/11, he went to Pakistan specifically to dig into those links between terror groups and potentially the Pakistani establishment.
His colleagues, people like Azhar Namani, they described his approach as careful, calculated, not reckless. She pointed out that back then, kidnapping a journalist in Pakistan was actually very rare, almost unthinkable.
Which makes what happened even more shocking in retrospect. Nomani's reaction to the recent Bahawalpur strike, she posted it online. It was really powerful, sort of relief mixed with deep sorrow that it took so long.
Relief and sorrow, yeah, I can understand that. She also detailed how Pearl got connected to his kidnappers, didn't she? Through a fixer.
Yeah, the fixer introduced him to someone called Arif in Bahawalpur, apparently a PR guy for another militant group. And he connected Pearl to Omar Sheikh. Just this chain of connections leading to tragedy.
So Nomani's view is clear. Pearl's murder wasn't random, it was calculated by a network that had felt untouchable for years, and Bahawalpur was central.
Which brings us right back to that whole issue. The long-standing accusations against Pakistan about, well, harboring these groups, GEM, Lashkar-e-Taiba, despite public statements against terrorism.
And Bahawalpur became the symbol of that perceived hypocrisy, didn't it? A hub for state-sponsored terror, some would say, since the 90s, with camps operating openly.
Just like Pearl reported back in 2001. And depressingly little seemed to change in the 23 years since. His reporting exposed it, but it persisted.
Let's talk about Omar Sheikh again briefly. Arrested in India in the 90s for kidnapping tourists, then released in 99.
In that IC-814 hijacking prisoner swap, along with Masood Azhar, it's just, the connections are stark.
Incredibly stark. Sheikh gets freed, Azhar founds GEM, and then Sheikh plays this direct role in Pearl's murder. It's undeniable.
And then the Pakistani Supreme Court decision in 2021, freeing Sheikh and others convicted in Pearl's case. Despite huge international outcry, despite the pleas from Pearl's parent.
Just baffling to many observers. And now Sheikh is reportedly under state protection in Pakistan.
That's the report. And then there's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind. He confessed to personally beheading Pearl, but he's still at Guantanamo Bay, never tried specifically for that crime.
Justice moves incredibly slowly, if at all, sometimes.
Which is why Operation Sindoor felt like, well, more than just retaliation. It felt like a statement against that impunity, a message that there are consequences.
And the international reaction seemed to reflect that, to some extent. Support from U.S. Congressman Sri Thanadar, countries like France, the U.K., Israel, Panama.
Yeah, and activists like Amy Mack calling it targeting the Islamic terror infrastructure that breeds jihad. There seemed to be this undercurrent of, finally, some action.
But Pakistan's response was immediate and forceful, too.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the strikes, authorized military retaliation.
Right. They launched about 300 drones towards India soon after, targeting military sites.
Which India says it intercepted using its S-400 air defense system, successfully.
Thankfully. But it was a serious escalation. Things got very tense very quickly. It took intervention, reportedly involving U.S. President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio, to get a ceasefire brokered by May 10th.
So a ceasefire is in place now, but fragile seems like the right word.
Extremely fragile. The underlying issues haven't gone away. It feels more like a pause than a resolution.
And amidst all this military and political maneuvering, we absolutely have to remember the human cost. The Pahalgam attack. Devastating for those families.
Absolutely. Hearing from people like Asavari Jagdale, whose father was killed there, Her gratitude towards the Indian military for, in her words, delivering justice, it's incredibly moving, powerful.
We also have Pakistan's claims of civilian deaths in Bahawalpur, the mosque, the child. While India insists they only hit terrorists, the fog of war is real. Getting the absolute truth is always difficult.
It is. And war is messy, destructive. Establishing facts definitively in the immediate aftermath it's a challenge.
The strike also hit Masood Azhar's family directly. His sister, brother-in-law, nieces, nephews, grandkids reportedly among the dead. A grim personal toll.
And it forces you to ask that hard question, doesn't it? Would those deaths have happened if Bahawalpur hadn't been allowed to become this terror factory for so long?
It highlights the dangerous environment these groups create, even for themselves and their families.
And remember, this isn't just a regional problem. These networks based in places like Bahawalpur, they have links, potential or confirmed, to international plots beyond South Asia, possibly 9/11, attacks in Europe.
So India's strike, you could argue, was hitting a global threat, not just a local one.
I think that's a fair assessment. And it also brings back the focus on justice for journalists like Daniel Pearl, who risk everything for the truth. Seeing a hub connected to his death finally face consequences, there's a sense of, well, delayed accountability, perhaps.
Delayed accountability. So the ceasefire holds for now. But Pakistan's foreign minister, Ishaq Dar, has talked about de-escalation if India stops attacks, but also warned of future responses. It's still on edge.
Very much so. And internationally, you see the splits. China, Turkey backing Pakistan, Israel, the West largely supporting India's right to act against terror. Complex diplomacy.
And Daniel Pearl's father, Judea Pearl, his reaction must be so bittersweet. He thanked India for the strike, but the pain is still there. And figures like Omar Sheikh are still effectively free. The fight for justice isn't over for him.
No, absolutely not. So the Bahawalpur strike, it's significant. It might bring some sense of reckoning, but it's probably not the end of the story, not as long as the underlying issues of safe havens persist.
So Operation Sindoor, it was definitely a major moment, a challenge to impunity, a form of justice, maybe, for Daniel Pearl and so many others. Bahawalpur went from being this perceived safe haven to, well, a cautionary tale.
A potent one. And while one strike won't end terrorism globally, it does send a powerful signal, doesn't it? That these places aren't untouchable, that actions have consequences.
It really makes you think about Daniel Pearl's courage, India's decision, and the whole global stance against terrorism. The events in Bahawalpur, they really underscore that accountability, even if it takes years, decades. Sometimes it does eventually arrive, something to really mull over.